Kelly, are you gonna lead us in here or shall I do that?
Well, I am happy to. I'm sorry, I was having a little technical difficulty on my end, but I can't see you, but it sounds like you can hear me.
I
So
can.
good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming back. And I'm going to turn the microphone over to Beth to do some introductions. She is hosting a multidisciplinary panel on SARTs this afternoon. So thank you to those that are joining her panel. We have Amy Herring and Angie Morris, Jennifer Barrett, and Kim Bowman. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, or Beth introduce, but thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Kelly. Are you moving my slides forward? Is that what you are doing for me?
Yeah.
I
Yes,
love
I
that.
will.
All right, I'm going to give you the high sign to do that. Why don't you go ahead and move us forward one quick slide? And you can, nope, let's go back. There should be a slide in between. Nope, nope. Okay, that's fine. Go back one more, Kelly, for me. All right. Well, happy Tuesday, everyone. It is day 3 of Core 40, and I am thrilled to be on the agenda, which I don't know that I ever have been before. I am the president and CEO of ICESA HT, and you have been hearing from my colleagues along the way here during Core 40, and I am going to moderate this panel today. And I'm really just so very pleased and gratified that we've got these 4 panelists who are just rock stars in their professional capacity and going to really enlighten us a lot today. So my goal for our panel today is to create an environment of cross-disciplinary understanding. And that sounds really highfalutin and very, looks like I got my SAT words out of the way there this morning. But what it really means is that we've all got to get along. And I've only been in this job a year, but what I have observed in a little over a year of my time in this work is that I don't know that we understand. We talk a lot about survivors and serving them, which is what we're here to do. And in order to do that, in my opinion, effectively, we have to understand the other people in this work who are serving and helping survivors as well. In a minute, I'm going to talk about a framework that we're going to use for our conversation today. But before I do that, I am going to have our panelists introduce themselves. And I know that last week you had a ground kind of a leveling about SARTs, or the sexual assault response teams, which are a creation of statute here in Indiana, and who are the vehicle that we use for interdisciplinary discussion and work around helping victims and survivors. So we're going to hear today from 4 people who are different pieces of that multidisciplinary or multi-professional opportunity. I see that they're working on the screen. Does everyone else see Michael and Kelly working on the screen, or is it just me? There we go. All right, I'm going to have Angie Morris, who is the first person I see, so there's nothing magical about this order. It's not that I love her the best, although I do love her. Angie, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. I'd like you to tell us what you do, how long you've been doing it, and what your role is in the context of a SART.
Sure. My name is Angie Morris. I am a registered nurse and board certified sexual assault nurse examiner for adults, adolescents, and peds. I'm also certified as an emergency nurse. I've been working in the field of forensic nursing for nearly a decade. And prior to becoming a nurse, I worked in the criminal justice field. So a little bit unique, but right now my main goal is to train nurses and healthcare providers throughout the state of Indiana on how to collect evidence and how to best provide medical forensic exams to patients, because obviously this is a lot more than just collecting evidence and swabs, which I'll talk to you guys about in a little bit. And what else did you want to know about? I'm sorry.
That sounds perfect.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay.
Thanks, Angie. All of you will be hearing from Angie later in our time on Core 40, because there is a lot to know about the sexual assault
focusing on crimes against persons, primary focus on sexual assaults against adults and children, as well as homicides. And then my role in context of kind of what we're doing today, I'll be part of Core 40 as well, just as the law enforcement component to try to bridge the gap that we're all trying to do right now, as well as I'm on our state SART and our local SART. And I believe Angie forgot to mention, she serves on the state SART with me as well.
Yes, she does. Thank you, Jennifer. Sorry about the interruptions there. All right, next I see Amy Herring. So Amy, you're next.
Hi, guys. My name is Amy Herring. I am the Chief Deputy Prosecutor for Hancock County. I'm also the chairwoman for our sexual assault response team there in Hancock County. I have been prosecuting for a little over 15 years now. In a previous life long ago, I was a kindergarten teacher. So I've been working with kids throughout the tenure of my career. Prior to being the chief deputy here, I was working with the St. Joseph County Metro Homicide Unit up in South Bend for 2 years. And before that, I worked as the director lead attorney for the St. Joseph County Special Victims Unit, which was a model facility that did a multidisciplinary team approach and a specific unit for any sexual assaults, domestic violence, crimes against children, where the entire unit was co-located off-site with our Child Advocacy Center, with Adult Protective Services, with the Satellite DCS office, with our investigators and our prosecutors, our victim advocates, all co-located in one specific building off-site from our regular prosecutor's office. From that role, I really specialized in crimes against children and sexual assaults, worked very closely with our SANE nurses up there in St. Joe County and our Family Justice Center, which was also on site, in creating a robust SART team there. When it came down to Hancock County in 2020, right before the pandemic started, I think I was in my role maybe 2 weeks before our first rape came in, and it was literally handed off to me as in, well, hey, this is why you're here and one of your passions. So here's this case, you need to take a look at it. And frankly, my face just kind of dropped, because reviewing what the case looked like, it was obvious that there were a lot of gaps in services, a lot of gaps in the way in which our survivors were handled. And so my first question was, where's your SART protocol, so that I can review how we have complied or not complied with some of those protocols. And anybody I asked gave me a deer in headlights look. And so that was kind of task number one from when I got started down there, to get SART up and running. And we had to start from scratch. There was a previous SART that had maybe been in existence about 5 years prior, but it was just a protocol and the boxes were ticked. There wasn't any frequency in the meetings. So we started all over. We got some buy-in from the local law enforcement agencies and victim advocacy, and we got moving, and we picked up speed pretty quickly and got some momentum from the community. So we have really done quite a bit since 2020. And I'm happy to report that we've just made huge improvements and strides and progress in our community, who frankly is a very small conservative area that sexual assault is not talked about. One of the things that was discussed when I was interviewing for this particular position was the fact that they had not had a successful rape prosecution conviction at trial in 15 years when my prosecutor was elected. And that frankly just wasn't going to cut it for me or for that prosecutor. And so we had a lot of work to do, and we are doing it. And there's a lot of wins and a lot of losses along the way, but we are boots on the ground running. And so we're doing the hard work. And sometimes that comes with some resistance. Sometimes it comes with some reluctance, and sometimes it comes with some losses, but we're doing the hard work. And so we're learning the hard way and dragging the community along with us. So that's kind of my background.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Kim, I don't see your face and I want to. Can you? There she is. Kim, you're next to introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Kim Bowman. I work for Safe Place, which is a sexual assault center in southeastern Indiana. We are actually a dual providers. So we provide domestic violence and sexual assault services. We are a shelter. We also have a very strong non-residential program. So we cover 6 counties and we have satellite offices in most of our 6 counties. So we have case managers scattered throughout that area, again, providing both domestic violence and sexual assault services. I am a supervisor here at the agency. I'm also an advocate. So I also serve on call. I provide hospital responses. I run weekly support groups here at our facility. And again, work alongside the rest of my coworkers and the rest of the team to provide the best services that we can. I've been here approximately 9 years. We just opened or added I guess you could say sexual assault services about 4 years ago. And last year was more of a shift for me. Primarily before that, my main focus was our domestic violence program. So I'm kind of adding in the sexual assault piece and have been diligently studying statute since I've added that piece in. So again, I've been here almost 9 years. Before that, I worked in home-based services. I took referrals from our local Department of Child Services, as well as our juvenile probation. And I did that for about 16 years. So I've been in our local area for a long time and have built some really good collaborative relationships with some of our partners.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. So a couple of things I want to reflect on in those introductions, and then we'll jump into the meat of our panel. The comments that I think Amy and Kim really focused on, and Jen a little bit too, is this notion of community, of that you exist and do your work in a community, and that community needs to support and understand and be alongside. And sometimes that's something that's already established when you start doing your work. And I'm speaking now to our young advocates who are going to be a part of a community in the work they're doing. But sometimes those relationships have not been established in a very constructive way. And so making sure that you're a part of the community and that you are working with other leaders and other disciplines is really, really important. And it really is going to lead to success, or a lack of it is going to lead to some frustration, I would say. So let's go to the next slide. In thinking about how to use a framework for our discussion today, I didn't come up with this. I can take no credit for this. This is actually a long-standing framework that's existed in the world, but it's called GSOT, or Goal, Strategy, Objectives, and Tactics. And it's a way to think about work that you're doing and how different levels of your goals and your focus come into play. So the goal is, of course, the broad objective that is high level, very aspirational. Strategies are really the approach that you take, and different disciplines will have different approaches. And the reason we have 4 of you on the panel today is because I want you to talk in very specific terms about which strategies that you use and why they're different. Objectives are measurable steps, and we're probably not going to talk too much about that because our work, it's hard to measure how a survivor is finding healing and wholeness, and that's a really hard thing. We can measure prosecutions, we can measure kits that are collected by the SANES, but measuring really the survivor-centered work that we do can be very hard. But then tactics really are the day-to-day, the nitty-gritty, the things that you really put into place, much of which many of the tactics that all 4 of you will use are not things that you get to decide, right? Prosecutors have very specific rules, very specific protocols. Enforcement has very specific rules and protocols that they follow as well. Very specific things that you both have to do and that you need to do. And so those really are the tactics. So going to the next slide, I want to use this framework as kind of an example in my own work. So the goal of our discussion today is ending sexual violence in Indiana. And that, by the way, is a goal that we all share. And the good news about the goal, again, that we all share, is that we're really working toward that goal, all of us. Now, the next slide will show us how we have different strategies. And so in my world, as the head of the coalition and the president and CEO here, I have all kinds of different strategies. Primary and secondary prevention is something that we work on. You'll hear more about that later in Core 40. Establishing and supporting survivor services all around the state, partnering with members of the criminal legal system, supporting local SARTs, helping train local SARTs. We do awareness and advocacy. I'm a legislator. These are my strategies. So the strategies are the way we go about serving the goal. And then the next slide are some objectives, and we're not going to talk too much about objectives today, but just for your reference, things like how many counties are covered by a rape crisis center? How many counties are covered by a functioning and active SART? Talked about protocols, and that I think was Amy who mentioned the protocols. How many counties have protocols and have put them into place and have gotten them back to us? These are things that are very measurable. And objectives, again, measurable, but not always the center of our work. The last slide talks about tactics. And in my world, we have lots of tactics, right? We are all part of Core 40 today. That's one of the tactical approaches that we take. So that's very directed training. We do a SART toolkit. We build awareness. We talk to the prosecutors. We partner with the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. We do a lot of work with our Title IX partners around the state and colleges and universities, also in K-12. So we use tactics in that work. And the list goes on and on of what our day-to-day and week-to-week tactics can be in the work that we're doing. So I'm gonna have Kelly, I think, go to the next slide. And yeah, so I'm gonna hear from all of you on my panel, and I'm gonna randomly start in the same list that we did our introduction. So Angie, I want you to talk to me about SANE nurses, what their strategies are, and why they're important for the work that you're doing to end sexual violence.
So obviously we share the same goal as you all, but our strategies look a lot differently. So I will talk just from the sexual assault nurse examiner perspective, mostly from an emergency department, but please understand that we have providers who are working in multiple situations throughout the state, including standalone clinics, child advocacy centers, and some other practice environments. But our primary strategies are to triage, stabilize, and treat the patients. We arrange for diagnostic testing, blood draws, we collect urine, then we explain all of the options that are available to our patients for evidence collection and potential examination. And sometimes that includes getting an exam without having evidence collected because maybe they're outside of the evidentiary time frame, or just letting them know kind of the risks, the benefits, and the alternatives of all of the situations that they have and options available to them. We provide STI testing. We collect a medical forensic history, so that includes not only just their medical history, but also a history of the event that happened, and that is useful in medical hearsay testimony should the case move forward through the legal system. We also do what's called a review of systems, so it's kind of where your doctor gets really up in your business and asks you questions literally about everything from the last time you had a bowel movement to how you're eating and drinking, and if you have been sick lately. So we kind of go into all of those things as well. And then we provide that head-to-toe examination and the evidence collection. And as a part of that, we also do specimen collection and medical treatment and referral for anything that we find that maybe, sometimes we do find medical issues that are not related to the assault. So specifically, we might find some sort of a lesion in the cervix that we would say, this isn't related to the assault, but it is very important that you follow up with your physician on this. And so those are kind of the strategies that we utilize to help our patients when they're in front of us.
Thanks, Angie. Jen, I'm going to let you go next. What are strategies that law enforcement will use in meeting the overarching goal?
Yeah, so this is a little bit where I think for us it gets, you have a lot of more players pretty much right away. So, and just to sort of give you an overall sort of idea. So we have what everybody would be aware of, just uniformed officers, right? The survivor makes the report through a communications center, and these uniformed officers are going to arrive, and the first thing they're going to do is respond, make the scene safe. But of course, they're then going to start taking what I call a statement, not a full interview, but a statement from our survivor. From there, they're going to document that, and they're going to contact the detective, who often is going to be in plainclothes. A detective then is going to take over the investigation, and that's where you're going to see all different kinds of evidence collection, search warrants being served, interviews being done. I do like a particular style of interview called a cognitive interview for our survivors rather than a traditional law enforcement. But you're also going to see this, large scale collaboration during this investigative time, because what detectives are doing now is, we're working with the survivor and the advocate, as well as working with, sexual assault nurse examiners, other medical staff, the prosecutor's office. So we have to, at that very moment, all be very aware of how many people we have in the mix and the moving parts. So once we get to this investigative level, it can become quite convoluted if you're not careful. The other thing that we try to do, I encourage any investigator, is, of course, make sure that they're always, at least educated, so that they can at some point go out and train others and bring awareness to other areas in law enforcement. And that's sort of our strategy there. As far as our objectives, I mean, for us, we're always looking at things such as, and I think Amy talked about this, we're seeing, okay, how many target audiences did we actually, connect with? And from that, did we get good feedback? Did they understand the training? Were the questions appropriate? But we're also looking at other things such as, are we seeing how many cases were actually filed? How many sexual assault cases were filed? And then how many actually, came with a plea or conviction? And we're starting to see that, tick up over this education and prevention. Some other ways are when we start to continually see, other agencies reaching out to us to come and educate. That's another good marker for us to see, if we're meeting those objectives. And then overall tactics. I mean, tactics is, I think, one of the hardest things to do, because we have so many different people within these agencies. Even just in my agency, as I said, you got the uniform officer, you've got the investigator. So our tactics are all going to be different, and they're going to vary by person. But I think the biggest thing that I always try to make sure that everybody understands is be relatable.
Yeah.
I think I hear somebody who didn't mute themselves. So if you can make sure everybody's muted, Terry, for me, thank you. Go ahead, Jen.
It's okay. So I'm just getting it today.
You are. I don't know why that is. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's been all day, really. So I just try to make everything relatable. So whether it's the person or the training, I just try to, and I'll talk more about it later, but I try to make us all super aware of our, own human bias and how that's going to affect how we relate to others and present the goal and work together and collaborate. So that's how we work over here.
Thank you. And just to clarify for those who might be not very familiar, when you put a case together, really the goal is to put a strong case together so that you can pass it off to the prosecutor. So now we're going to hear from Amy, who is the prosecutor, about their strategies for this process.
Sure. So the short, sweet, easy answer, which I never give, as you heard, I like to talk, is to hold offenders accountable. That's the easy, short and sweet. That's what prosecutors are supposed to do, right? But as you heard from your panelists, there are lots of ways that we do that. And for the larger goal of ending sexual violence, just holding offenders accountable, that's not going to be enough. And we often fall short of that. But in our attempts at holding offenders accountable, there are lots of steps along the way where we have the opportunity to do other things that help us reach that goal. And so when I was thinking about how would I answer that question, I think the best way for me to give an overarching response to that would be to work with the multidisciplinary team in a leadership position to increase offender accountability through victim-centered approach to prosecution with a trauma-informed perspective from all members of the team. We talked, or I think it was Jen talked about the cognitive informed interviewing. You're not going to go in and do the same kind of interview for a survivor or victim, which a lot of times the law enforcement side of that, prosecutors, law enforcement will interchange victim and survivor because it is a legal term, a designation given to a particular person who fits the definition of victim. When we're working with them in preparation for a case, we often refer to them as a survivor on the other side of the event. And so that's actually something we've discussed in our protocol, is when to call them a victim and when to call them a survivor, because there's a legal designation. We want to promote education, awareness, and local resources to survivors, but also to those community members, stakeholders in the community, whether that's mental health providers, whether that's the people who have resources within the community, our child advocacy center, even just our faith-based community who has support groups or has some resources to help some of our survivors who may need assistance with childcare. They may need assistance with some financial support, but they may not be thinking about, oh, I could lend a hand in these ways if only I knew about it, because it isn't something that was talked about in our community for a very long time, because we don't like to think about bad things happening there. And so when we weren't openly discussing, hey, this is an issue and these are your neighbors that are suffering from these issues, we didn't have these people reaching out with resources. And now that we are talking about it, we are being inundated with people who want to help and who want to support and want to encourage, and that are sharing their stories of, you know what, something similar happened to me. So just talking about it and encouraging people to support each other, educating. We've done a lot of things in the schools, starting with middle schools and high schools, talking about not just, you know, what is teen dating violence, but also these are boundaries for your body. This is what sextortion is. These are, you know, this is child pornography that you're making. This is child pornography that you're distributing. This is child pornography that you are possessing. Those sorts of things that all lead to better educated juries in the long run. We have done a presentation for parents that says, these are things you need to talk to your children about. These are things you need to look for in cell phones, but just all the way around, we've had to do, you know, motions practice, which is frankly just educating the judicial officers in some way, shape, or form, which I mean, law enforcement, myself included, they come with ego, but so does judicial officers. And it's often not coming from a place of not wanting to know, it's just not having been educated. And so a lot of that comes with us being trained. And then when we have the experience and the training, providing that to other people so that we are getting the message across the board to our survivors, to our people on the front lines doing the work, to those first responders who know this is how I need to treat survivors differently from somebody who was, you know, a victim of an OWI crash or who had their car stolen, to the people that are in the courtroom, to our jurors, who, you know, used to think that if you wore certain clothing that you were asking to be treated in a certain way. But at the very basic level, just providing that standard protocol response so that it didn't matter if law enforcement agency A or law enforcement agency D responded, because lots of us have multiple jurisdiction or multiple agencies within our jurisdiction. You're going to receive the same coordinated response, the same care and services, regardless of who shows up at the scene. And all of that, all of us being good partners, all of us communicating collaboratively across the board helps us to hold offenders accountable. If you've got law enforcement agency A showing up, following the protocol to a T, making communication with a victim advocate right off the bat, contacting the prosecutor's office who's involved in the interviews, the suspect and the victim interviews from the get-go, and law enforcement agency D who does none of those things, it makes my job of holding the offender accountable through a successful prosecution plummet. So all of those things together would help me reach that, you know, short, sweet goal, which I said I wouldn't be able to say in a few words, become much more likely.
Thank you, Amy. Really, really good stuff. Kim, I'm going to let you back clean up, and then I'm going to reflect a little bit on what we've heard.
So my answer is probably a combination of strategy and tactics, but we are 100% survivor driven. So we want and support whatever it is the survivor wants. So at times, we are bound by confidentiality. So if they don't want to file a police report, we support them in that decision. If they choose not to go to the hospital, we support them in that decision. But of course, we talk to them about all of their options so they can make the most informed decision that is best for them. And during that process, if they change their mind at any point, then we support them at that point as well. We do want an end to sexual violence, and we want prosecution. We want all those things. We get very excited when we have a survivor that wants to pursue all of those options, but it's entirely up to them. We do offer primary and secondary prevention programming. We are in our local college. We are in all of our schools. So we have a whole prevention team that is working on that piece, while we also have a whole team that is working on the therapeutic survivor services that we offer and the healing and support that we offer. So those are our main strategies. We have a crisis line, and again, we have shelter. So that crisis line is really that point of contact, and that's offered 24 hours a day. We also have a limited texting line that's offered from like 9 to 9. So it's a little bit more limited. We also are out in the communities. We do community education. We do professional-based trainings. We try and work as many events as we can. We're on social media. Everything that we can do to provide education in the community on consent, on teen dating violence, which was referenced earlier, on sexual assault. And again, just to let them know what services are available at any point in time. All of our services are voluntary and free of charge, and we have no time limit. So that's something sometimes people aren't aware of, is that we are there at the point of crisis. We are there for short-term services or goal setting if that's what they want. And we are also there for long-term. So we have some clients that we've had for years. And as long as they are setting new goals, they can be a client as long as it's helpful for them to do so. We do provide a lot of safety planning and legal advocacy as well. It can be intimidating and scary to kind of navigate the legal system. So we, again, offer that support and go with them to as many things as we possibly can, so they have that support at all times.
Thank you, Kim. So one thing that I have found interesting is that, at least 3 of you, and Angie, I'm not calling you out because your work is different, but you have really talked about awareness and prevention. So it is, as a prosecutor, and I was a prosecutor for a time, the notion of kind of putting yourself out of business, right? That you would really love not to have these cases coming to you. Of course, we know that that's not the reality, but the notion that talking in the community, and again, that concept of community. Jen and Amy and Kim, of course, talked a lot about in the schools, in the universities, in the places where people gather, where you can talk to community about what's happening for awareness, but also how prevention really can come into play. Really important. And even though the advocates do not have as one of their main sort of objectives just to get cases handled, because it's not really the goal of the advocates, they play a role in that. So Kim, would you talk about how advocacy plays a role in prosecutions? I know that we don't require anyone to do anything, but if they're willing to participate in the criminal justice system, you indicated that that's something that you welcome. Tell me what role you play, and then I want to hear from Jen about how that work that the advocates do can be helpful. And I hear someone who needs to be muted. It looks like Barnes is the last name. If you can make sure you're muting yourself. Go ahead, Kim.
Am I still on downstairs?
So the way that we assist with the criminal justice process is, of course, we always give them the option of reporting. One thing we've done here that's been incredibly helpful is that we've built a liaison relationship with our local police department that's located right next door to us. And that they have basically assigned an officer that has had specialized training in working with sexual assault and domestic violence. The other officers have been instructed to reach out to her anytime they have questions or they have need. There's been times that she's come in on her off days to maybe handle a case that the department felt like needed more of that specialized care. She's come in for us if the survivor is willing and has taken follow-up pictures, for example, or maybe gotten a second statement that, you know, with additional information that the local officer needed when they wanted to file or pursue filing that police report. It's just been an amazing relationship. She also is an extra layer of safety for us. Anytime we have a safety concern, we've reached out to her. She's aware of all of our safety protocols. She alerts the rest of the department. So it is a relationship. We started on kind of a trial basis, and it's been so helpful that we're hoping to replicate that in our other counties. So that's one thing that we've done. We go with our survivor for everything. So if they want us present, you know, at the prosecutor's office, if they want assistance or support while writing the victim impact statement, if they want us present for the trial, of course, we're there for the entire thing with them. That may be sitting outside the room with them, so they have that support the whole time. You know, somebody's always with them. Just whatever it is that they need. So it, again, is completely survivor driven. We've had really good outcomes, you know, by providing just that intensive level of support. You know, we find that they're less likely to recant or to say that they don't want to participate in the process when they feel supported throughout the entire process. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful. Jen, I want to ask you about your assessment of advocates and what role they can play in the work you're doing.
Yeah, so that was something that was almost really, I want to say it was a barrier when I first started trying to, you know, sort of create that relationship with advocates and law enforcement. And I mean, there's several reasons. You know, law enforcement culture itself, we are, you know, very suspicious in nature. You know, we're going to always pick apart certain things that you say and some things that you don't. So, you know, part of what we have to do is we have to analyze what we have in front of us very quickly and make, you know, rapid decisions. So I understand sort of that culture was difficult at first, but once I was able to sort of, you know, explain to especially the detectives, because that's where the advocates become super important. For me, it became first and foremost about as long as I was using my advocate appropriately, right? And we'd already, now keep in mind, we've already met, we know each other, several of us, we've set up our own professional boundaries. We've discussed, you know, we've discussed what, you know, how they're going to respond to certain situations and just our own, you know, objectives and how we're going to go about them. So that's already set, right? The trust is there, the comprehension is there. But first and foremost for me, using that advocate, I found, you know, years back, it really just helps establish a better record. So a record of less misunderstanding, you know, less misinterpretation between myself and the then victim, but moving on to survivor, right? So just in general, it becomes emotionally draining on anybody, especially advocates, right? Because we're trying to investigate a case to put the best case together possibly, because that's part of our role to help that survivor move forward. But we're also, prior to using advocates, we were the emotional punching bag essentially as well. You know, everything was our fault, the laws, what we can and can't do. And because we're human, that becomes difficult, whether you like it or not. It's hard not to hang up the phone after you've just been cursed out and not have a little resentment and feel a little contempt, you know, for that person. So I also just talk about, you know, when I have my advocate do that, I just have this level of communication that is really just great. Again, I don't have the emotional, you know, baggage, if you will. I get that distance from emotion, so I can focus on my case. I can truly provide this survivor the services and the support that they need from me, because we all know a lot of times it does not end in the prosecutor's office or in the criminal justice system. So every interaction that I have with that survivor alongside of this advocate is crucial. because they're going to walk away and they're always going to remember this. And I always try to just, keep that in mind at the forefront. But time management, I'm able to focus, have emotional distance. And then more importantly, and I think this is where I'm talking about the misinterpretation, I'm not on the phone all the time when people are truly going through that traumatic brain experience where, now they're correcting certain things that they've said prior, because of course, these poor people are continuously being asked to give statements and or interviews. And if they're not being done properly, we're law enforcement, we have to document. We can't unknow what we know. So the problem becomes, if I'm on the phone more often than not, and then, certain things are said, I have no choice but to go look into it. And that's where that suspicion starts coming in, right? And now we've got this record where we're not really operating on that trauma-informed care if we're not careful. So the advocate is, quite honestly, my right hand through these, or the prosecutor, my right hand, my advocate, my left. We're all sort of right there together.
I appreciate that. That's a great analogy, and also a great reflection on staying the roles, focusing on the role. What is your role? What is the role of the advocate? And last week I was listening to Becca Emerson, who was doing our presentation about, being an advocate, and her, she said very clearly, it's not our job to investigate. It's not our job to interrogate. It is our job to listen and believe. And that's very different than what a detective does. It is, it is just a very different role. And when we can all understand the roles that we're playing, then, survivors are helped. Kim, is there anything you want to say in reflection? And then I want to move to Amy on that particular point.
No, I agree. And I think really understanding our roles, as you just said, Beth, that it is our role to listen and believe, but it doesn't mean I don't understand law enforcement's role. And their role is to build the strongest case that they possibly can. And sometimes on the surface, it looks like our roles conflict, and they don't. So it's really important for advocates to understand, I work with a lot of new advocates that are angry on behalf of their client over the way something is handled or over the way something has been stated. And I think once we understand each other's roles, instead of us being angry, we can explain to our client better where that perspective is and why it's the way that it is. And again, then we can support each other as that client is moving through the process, and we can better support that client.
Excellent. All right, Amy, I want to hear from you on this point, and then I want to take a little bit of a break and make sure we are responding to questions if there are questions. And Angie, don't forget, I'm coming back to you, I swear. Angie's been a little quiet because I haven't called on her, but I'm going to here in a minute. Amy, go ahead.
Sure. I think this may come off sounding a little bit callous, and I think it does come into knowing our roles and staying in our lanes. And this maybe bit me in the butt a few times when I was younger and less experienced. And part of that is being able to remove the emotion from decision-making processes. And part of that is not being that sounding board for a victim and for a survivor. And we have to take our ethical responsibility very seriously. And when we're making charging decisions and when we're making plea agreements and doing those sorts of things, we want to include the victim in those conversations about what's happening and make sure they have updates about what's going on and get their opinions related to what they think is best. But at the end of the day, I have to do what I am ethically required to do under the law. And that doesn't necessarily mean that's the same thing the victim wants or that it's the same thing that they believe is the right thing to do. But I may know a lot more, hopefully know a lot more about the law than what they do, and can foresee maybe some of the things, what if there was DNA all over the kit that was collected by the same nurse? But I know with fairly reasonable certainty that all of that's going to be suppressed. And so I'm left with, these 4 things that are likely to come into evidence. Setting realistic expectations with a survivor from the outset is something that has also been an issue between law enforcement, advocates, prosecution. If they're being told from the outset, here's what's being charged, or I've submitted this for charges. I know what that means in a legal sense, that law enforcement is requesting these charges, but that may not be what a survivor hears. They hear that, level 1 rape has been charged, or they hear that, aggravated battery has been charged versus this is what has been referred. Instead of saying I'm investigating and I will proceed with giving this to the prosecutor to review for charges, they will make the charging determination. Or an advocate I had previously telling a survivor, this is a great case, there's a lot of evidence, you know, I can't see why this wouldn't proceed, without knowing the full story of what's going on. And the same thing with law enforcement. And then it gets to me and they don't see all of the other things on the other side. And so then when I have to sit down and have a conversation with a survivor about, well, here are all the other things that we need to consider, and here's where we're really at, and having a very transparent conversation about timelines and what to expect from defense and where are you with your mental and emotional health and those sorts of things. I have to be able to remove the emotional side of it, of how this impacted them and how upset they are and how this could have really traumatically changed everything. I understand that. I know how all of those things work, but that cannot impact my charging decision at the end of the day. And so having somebody else that can go through those things with that survivor, that can be their point of contact and also help to explain to them that we are coming from different places, and that I'm happy to listen if that's what you want to share with me, that that's your opinion about why you want things to go this way. But I will respond in a way that they may think is unempathetic or unsympathetic, because I will keep coming back to the law, because that's what my ethical responsibility is. I almost always start my conversations with victims that I'm happy to meet them. I'm glad that they had the courage to report that they came to my office, they want to interact with me, but I'm really sorry that it's under these circumstances. A lot of times nobody said that to them yet. They will have been to the hospital, they have dealt with numerous police officers, they've dealt with an advocate, but everybody's all about business because they're ticking the boxes and they think they're doing trauma informed, but that nobody said to them, you know, I'm really sorry this happened to you, because that is an emotional side of it. And sometimes it's just that one thing that they need to hear that is human, that humanizes the process, that they get, okay, we are in this together. Even if we see things differently, you know, I sometimes have to explain, I don't want to put you through what I know is about to happen once we get this ball rolling, if I know at the end of the day, the likelihood of conviction is really, really slim. And even if you disagree and you say, I can do it, I can stand up, I want to testify, I can go through all of those things, and I would rather do that than not try. I'm the one who ultimately has to make that decision. And I want to take that pressure off of them to make the decision thinking, no, I want to file, I want to file, I want to file. And so we need to be realistic with expectations and put that on me, not on them from the outset, and create that partnership from the very, very beginning. And then if we all are doing what we can to stay within our lane, but communicating with each other, I think that builds a really healthy relationship for everybody, instead of maybe stepping on toes or having to go back and forth. Just that going back to that collaborative teamwork piece to make everybody more successful.
Absolutely. I want to reflect quickly on something that Amy said, you know, which could be a little bit of a nuance, but I want people to understand that in this context, Amy, as prosecutor, and to a certain extent, Jennifer as well, do not work for the victims. Your client, Amy, is not the victim, and you know that, and the prosecutors know that. And really, your client are the people of Indiana who hope for a safe environment for them in the community. And the victim isn't the ultimate decision maker. Now, in the work that Kim and to some extent in the work that Angie and the other nurses are doing in the healthcare context, you do drive your own train, as a patient. You can say, no, that's a treatment I don't want. I don't want to get collected. I don't want all of these things to happen to me. And as the advocate, you are working with the victim for what it is they want. But that's not the criminal legal system. It's different. And that's why this GSOT strategy we all have the same goal, but the strategies are different. And the victim is not necessarily the ultimate decider about what happens in a criminal case. And that's really hard for them to hear very often.
It gets
and I know, Amy,
really
you're sensitive to this.
difficult if a victim changes their mind once the ball starts rolling, as I say. If you file a case and then they back out, because the likelihood of us proceeding with any success in a prosecution without a victim's cooperation is slim to none. So proceeding without their testimony would essentially tank the case. And so putting us in a position of having to decide whether to dismiss a case or proceed with a victim who wants no part in it anymore is ultimately a decision we would have to make on a case-by-case basis, because we don't want, I mean, I understand all of the considerations that need to be made for the well-being of the whole person when we're talking about a survivor. But at the end of the day, if I have to force a survivor to testify, that is something that we can do. I hate to do it. It's not something that is considered best practice in most circumstances. But that is something that I talk about at the outset of the meeting. When I first have a conversation with a survivor, is that I work for the state, I don't represent you. And again, sometimes it comes across very callous, but that is who employs me. It's not, you versus defendant, it's the state of Indiana versus the defendant. And while you are an integral part of this prosecution proceeding, I cannot allow you to drive the bus in this particular instance. So lots of things come into play if we have a survivor who later decides they're not interested in cooperating, or they're no longer able to cooperate is really what it is. It's not that they don't want to, or that they just decided it's not for them. I know that there are lots of factors in that. So those are huge decisions that have to be made, again, as a team, as we proceed forward.
Yeah. So we've been at it about 45 minutes, and I think it might be a good time to see if there are questions. Kelly, if you're still with me, if you could move the slide forward, and let's just come to the slide where we have everyone's name. Yeah, great. We have a question about civil options now, for survivors. And Amy just said very clearly and importantly, a criminal case is the state of Indiana versus the defendant, right? That's the posture, right, that we talk about. Amy is not a civil lawyer, I don't think, anymore, but probably could speak to what are some civil options for survivors if they choose to put a case that the posture really is the victim versus the defendant. Amy, why don't you give us a few minutes on that?
So, especially since we're being recorded, I'm going to be very, very brief on that one as far as how long I generally talk. I'm not a civil attorney, never have been a civil attorney, am not as well versed in that as I normally would be on criminal things. There are civil options. The statute of limitations is very generous on sexual assault type offenses for civil liability. And so there are, especially in Indianapolis and the surrounding areas of Indianapolis, attorneys who specialize in civil litigation related to sexual assault. And I do at least let our survivors know, especially if there is not a prosecution, that they do have the ability to seek a civil lawsuit where it would be, especially if they're concerned about me versus them, that they do have options to seek a civil suit. And that's really all I can comment on, because I don't have that experience in the civil realm.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the most important thing to say about that is there are lawyers who do that. I know who they are, and we can refer or, help connect survivors, but people should not be, have expectations that are unrealistic, right? Those cases are hard to prove, they're hard to win, and it's hard to collect any meaningful judgment. It's usually about money. There are other things courts can do, but that's a long road, and that's a road that doesn't always end where you think it's going to. It's not like TV, right? And you see movies and TV and you just think, well, I'll sue him and he'll pay me a whole bunch of money and it'll be better. That's not a realistic expectation. As a lawyer, I try to also tamp expectations. We got another question, and let me see if I can get it here. This is for Amy. How, as advocates, can we help survivors understand that sometimes plea offers are the best outcome? I know that in my district, we do a lot of plea deals. Sometimes survivors aren't happy with that. They want to, it says just asking for justice, just asking for advice about that. Thank you to whoever sent in that question. And Amy, I'm going to let you handle it there.
So I would always ask for the specific attorney who drafted the plea agreement to have a conversation with the survivor prior to the plea agreement. I mean, that is something in my office that our victim advocate that is employed by our office is required to reach out to the victim a minimum of 3 times prior to that plea offer being actually offered. If the victim is non-responsive, we'll go ahead and offer it. If the victim has something to say, we will invite the victim to come in and have a conversation with us about it, where we can say, you know what, I appreciate the concerns you've brought about or the issues, and I did not consider it, or I did consider it, and here's why we are where we are. And sometimes that has merit and sometimes it doesn't. Frankly, there are sometimes you're never going to convince the survivor that that is the best outcome. Sometimes they want their day in court. The way that I generally handle those particular cases is to just remind them again that I am the legal expert. I am not the expert on them and their lives. They are the expert when it comes to them, and they can tell me what it is that they want. At the end of the day, again, my obligation is to inform them of the status of the case, to inform them of the ongoing discussions and negotiations, and to provide them with what their rights are. And so it is their right to show up at a sentencing hearing, and it is their right to provide the court with what they believe the right sentence should be. Now, I do caution them that this could mean that essentially it blows up the plea. It could result in a plea not being accepted by the court, and we're back to square one. And I have had that happen. And so I generally will let them know specifically if it seems like a plea that is too lenient or is too favorable to the defendant, there's a reason, and that reason is X, Y, or Z. And it's either we've had a suppression hearing and this isn't coming in, or we have a victim who is uncooperative, in which case you're not usually having these conversations about why they don't want the plea agreement. Or we have a judicial officer who is unlikely to give more than what we're offering in the plea agreement if we were to go to trial. And so why would we spend a week or 2 weeks going to trial and putting a victim through the humiliation, the embarrassment, the inconvenience of having to testify, if at the end of the day, we're going to end up with something fairly similar or even less as far as accountability, as far as a punitive sentence than what we would get if we were to get this conviction. Oftentimes we want a registerable offense. We want something that we can enhance. We want something that's going to have something hanging over their heads on the back end. So it may be less time on the front end and more probation. Sex offender specific probation is very difficult to complete without violation. So we give them the opportunity to complete it successfully. And if they can't, then they're going to go, and we know the judge will send them if they get a violation. So it's just an open conversation that says, look, one, the judicial system is set up for plea agreements to handle 98% of our cases. We can't try every case. Here are the benefits for us to work this out by way of plea agreement. We want your input. At the end of the day, again, it's going to be a decision that the prosecutor makes with your input. You have the right to be heard. You have the right to tell the judge what you think of that, understanding that that could mean the plea is withdrawn based upon what you say to the court, and we're back at square one. So just, again, a very, very transparent conversation with real expectations. I always tell people too, hey, you know what, I'm going to be very honest and open with you. You may not like what I have to tell you all the time, but I will always tell you the truth. I expect you to tell me the truth. Your only job is to tell me the truth. And so you can ask me anything and I'll answer it to the best of my ability. Sometimes the answer will be, I can't tell you, but I'll tell you the truth when I can. And so that's sometimes all I can say.
That's really helpful. We've got one more question, and I'm going to put this to Kim first. The question is, how would you suggest building a better relationship with counties in which the prosecutor or advocates don't communicate with the victims in a timely manner? And I think that question means the advocates who work in the prosecutor's office.
Yeah,
And
I think
Kim,
it.
And since
I think
you
it's
have
victim assistance.
Victim assistance, right, for prosecutors. Kim, you've got multiple counties, and one of the challenges, and hearing Amy talk is so helpful and refreshing, and she is one prosecutor in one county in a big state. So Kim, can you reflect on what to do in places where you don't necessarily have an Amy who is really responsive and helpful to the survivors?
Actually, this is a county that I'm familiar with, and there has been a lot of prosecutor turnover in that county. So I think it's just that persistence of going in there and continuing trying to meet with them and build those relationships. I think someone had alluded earlier to the fact that not everyone sees benefit in having a victim advocate involved. It takes time to build those relationships and for them really see where advocates can be beneficial. Not just in the survivors healing, but with the other objectives that other collaborative partners are working towards. So I think just continuing to try and rebuild those relationships, and just most importantly, for advocates, remembering that our primary responsibility is to our survivor, and representing them and supporting them to the best of our ability. So
that's really helpful. All right, let's get Angie in the conversation, and I want to pivot on something Kim just said, which is this notion of the advocates understanding, and being persistent and making sure they focus on what the survivors need. Angie Morris, I think you're with us still. I know you've been helping SANES around the state do their work, and their work is clinical, of course, but also in building rapport with survivors, victims at that stage, really, who are early in the process. What do you want the advocates to know, Angie, about the process and about the work the SANES are doing? What do you, if you could tell the advocates, which you can right now, what is it you want them to know, and what do you think are some of the misconceptions?
I think one of the misconceptions that we tend to work against a lot of times is that the nurses don't want the advocates involved, especially at the hospital. And that's actually not true. The best way I can explain this is that, we all have a role in helping victims, and we've talked a lot today about staying in our lane. And, we all want to help. We all want to help the person get through the situation. We all have our own gift or way of doing that. But when we all come to the table at the same time, it's very overwhelming for the victim, and it's kind of used car salesman like. No offense to any used car salesman on this call, but it's so much. It's like, oh no, over here I have this 86 model and it's 2,500. No, over here I have that, and it's like, hold on a minute. So we definitely want advocates involved. We want them reporting to the hospital. The other thing I think that it's hard for people to understand is that in that first couple minutes of an emergency department visit, I know that there's been such a push over the past couple of years for, before we even see this patient, to make a phone call to the advocate and make sure that they're on their way. And while that sounds great on paper, in an emergency department, that is not the environment that we work in, and we simply cannot waive from that. We have we are responsible to the Joint Commission. We are responsible to the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare services. We have EMTALA, which is a federal law that requires that we see patients in an emergent situation, and so we have other time limits that we have to get patients seen in a certain time limit based upon their ESI level, and so they have to be triaged in a certain level. And then patients have autonomy and they have the right to confidentiality. And the problem with us, reaching out before we've even had a chance to present this option to the patient is they haven't had a chance to be in control of their care. They don't even understand what this extra person coming into the room is for, and cannot delay care in any aspect for someone who is not a part of the healthcare team to arrive to our site. So ideally, what we've tried to guide the nurses to do is to make sure that immediately in those first couple moments that, if you've got someone who is not stable in any way, we're going to deal with that issue first, right? We always deal with airway, breathing, circulation. If none of those things are stable or are compromised in any single way, no matter how slight, it doesn't matter who wants in the room. I don't care if Officer Barrett or Detective Barrett comes in, she's gonna wait because that's just what the process is. So we have to defer to that triage, airway, breathing, circulation, and then we meet those psychosocial needs. So now that we know that you're stable, and now that we have an understanding of what the heck happened to you, because remember, if we're calling you before we even know what happened, it's going to be really hard for our victims to say, oh yeah, bring in another person, because they don't want that. So normally, if we could just get a snippet of what happened, then we can talk to them in a way of, oh, hey, you know, okay, because this guy that assaulted you lives in your apartment complex, I think it's going to be really important for you to meet with our advocate, and here's why. And so having some way of explaining that to them and just having some of that history does kind of help us get you a seat in the room. When we do it the other way, we see a lot more no's than yeses when we just try to kind of push the advocate through the door. The other issue is that we've had a lot of violations on patient privacy with an advocate coming in, being introduced to the patient, and the patient already knew of that person in another aspect of their life. That is a complete violation of their privacy and autonomy. And so we want to ensure that that does not happen. In one situation, we actually had an ex-sister-in-law involved. So that is why we're like, whoa, hold on, we just want to, like, it's not that we don't want you in the room, because we genuinely do. We just want to make sure that it's at the right time and that the patient is in the right frame of mind to be receptive of that care. So again, if just given a couple minutes for us to do our job, we can be far more effective at the question of, would you like a victim advocate? Here's why you need them. I think that's the biggest thing that we go against. We sometimes also come against concerns or complaints of victim blaming. Oftentimes our line of questions it's not super sensitive in the way that I think sometimes we would want to be. And so we do kind of caution our nurses, we need to be very careful about how we ask the questions. But you know, when we are asking questions about how much did you have to drink, how much of that did you willingly consume, did you consume any drugs, what substances were you using, that is not us trying to be like, okay, you big druggie, why are you in this situation? Well, I just wrote down all the drugs and that's why we're here. That's not it at all. Not to say that that can't happen. If that happens, please let us know. We will address that issue. But we need to understand, one, for your substance uses, is there anything that we're going to give you that's going to interact with what you have taken, knowingly or unknowingly? But not only that, because one, it's a safety issue, but two, are we looking at a potential for drug facilitated sexual assault? And because a lot of times drug facilitated sexual assault doesn't involve actual drugs, it involves alcohol. I want to know, the last time you had 13 beers, did you pass out? Did you vomit 67 times the next day? I want to know, is there anything that's different about this time? Because did you leave your drink unattended? Are we potentially thinking about other substances, or was there the potential for another substance that maybe we're missing? And that could be part of your medical symptoms too, but also it could be reflected in the whole criminal justice process of, were drugs or alcohol utilized in this offense? And in many cases, that's what a lot of these guys do, right? They wait for these victims to get impaired and then they pounce. And so, you know, we've got a lot of serial offenders that are going to capitalize on people who have been impaired. And so we have to have those conversations. And if you believe that they're not happening in the truly most victim-centered way, have that conversation with the nurse before you go. I'm doing that Max Headroom thing again. I'm sorry. My computer is doing weird stuff. So
That's
just
okay.
take it for what it is. But I forget what I'm saying now because I'm like from the 90s.
Well, I remember the 90s, Angie. So I'm going to give you a minute to get your system.
I'm still here, but it's going to keep doing that. Sorry. Anyway.
You're okay. Kim, I want to give you an opportunity to reflect on what Angie just said. And then I'm going to come to Jennifer on the issues of interacting with victims, you know, while they're receiving medical care. So Kim, you first.
Yeah, just listening. Actually, Angie came and did a training recently with our staff, which was incredibly helpful. So, we try and have all of our staff learn our collaborative partners' perspectives because we always gain new insight, and it helps us to do our jobs better. So after they came, one of the things we rolled out is even when the hospital calls us and request an advocate respond, we added an additional layer that once we arrive, we have to confirm that the individual still would like an advocate, because during that travel time, they may have changed their mind. And it's always about, again, being client driven. So we added another layer after hearing about a few of the situations Angie just mentioned, where advocates just kind of walked into the room without making sure it was a good time to enter. Hopefully that hasn't happened in our region. I'm not aware of that, but I wanted to make sure it didn't happen in our region. So I think it's just really helpful to understand where others come from. I think some of the advocates' perspective, I mean, there's times where we've had someone enter our shelter. We talk about the options available to them. We talk about, the option of seeking medical care, of going to the hospital, that we can drive them, we can be present with them. And so, I think sometimes there is some frustration when maybe we get there and we have to wait, 6 or 8 hours. And again, it's not anyone's fault. All of our SANE nurses in our region are on call, and sometimes they're just at another hospital doing another response. And so we just really try and communicate to our staff that, everyone's doing the best that they can and are as timely as possible. But I think sometimes when advocates get frustrated, it's just because they're looking out for, the interests of the patient. Our particular hospital likes the doctor to enter the room if somebody arrives at the hospital, and have that conversation with them before they dispatch us. And so sometimes there is a lengthy wait, and I think in our area is very, very rural. We have extensive miles to cover to get to the hospital. So we're always looking at ways that we can have a timely response, because of course we don't want to arrive and the entire exam is over when someone did want us present. And so, we're just always concerned with making sure we do our part and we get there as timely as possible, so that if someone does want that support, they have it.
Yeah, great. Really important. Jen, what is your perspective on this issue of making sure everybody is sensitive to what's happening in a medical setting?
For us, so our protocol is a little bit different, which is something that we're trying to get a lot of people to sort of grab on and start practicing. But first and foremost for us, our position would be just with the SANEs, that we don't really, as law enforcement, have any business being in while they're receiving all of the ABCs, right? Like, that's just, first of all, our survivor is not going to be able to give us any sort of information at this point. We're potentially fighting for our life. So, and unless I truly believe that two things have to happen, our victim is going to succumb to those injuries, and this might be the only possibility that I could get any sort of statement as to who's done this. That is the only time we do that. And of course, we'd work with medical staff so that we could try. But as we all know, sometimes that's not possible. Other than that, our detectives, unless there's a public safety issue, or someone is a victim is going to succumb to their injuries, or they have like serious bodily injury, which that would be a public safety issue, right? We typically do not go to the hospital because we recognize that they are not going to be able to give us the best information and the best statement at that time. It's not a good time for an interview. We understand that, they've just experienced an amazing trauma, that their account of events is not going to be even what they told the original uniformed officer. So we ask our uniformed officer to get that first statement so that that's what we can go on. And we try to give them that time to be with the SANEs and then be with the advocates. As far as we sort of operate advocacy wise, I have an advocate here in my police department. We also have one out of our prosecutor's office. And our detectives set up everything through our SANE. We find out which hospital to go to, where our SANE is going to be. And then we contact the advocate. I don't necessarily think that either one of although I understand that it's happened other places, our advocates work really well with our SANEs here in the sense that they understand the same thing. They're not going in during emergent care, that that comes first. And then we let them do the rest with the SANE. We stay hands off and give them that. We like to give them that 24 to 48 hours before we as detectives come in and start asking bigger questions. Now, that doesn't mean the investigation didn't continue, search warrants weren't served and things of that nature. It just means that we're trying to protect, that victim from having to give multiple accounts that we know will not be, at least there will be discrepancies, and we understand why. But again, advocacy for us, I don't think that we've ever necessarily had an issue in a hospital setting. But we do tend to have them after the fact. I like what Angie said when she said it's like a used car sales, but everybody's coming in and it is very, very confusing. So when
Well, I have a deal for you.
it is,
And it's like, I feel like somebody else is like, oh, but wait, I have a better model on this lot. Yeah, that's what it feels like.
it can be. So, we're seeing them within 24 to 48 hours. And oftentimes they'll come in with just truly stacks of papers and cards and victims' rights, and they don't know what any of it is. They may even have that literature straight in front of them saying who they talked to, what they're supposed to. They can't tell you. They oftentimes will hand it to us and say, I don't know what any of this means. I don't remember what happened. So that's one of the reasons we stay out of the ER if we can. I hope that answers the question.
It absolutely does. And I do think it is, to your point, best practice really to understand that the optimal engagement with law enforcement will happen later, unless there is the emergent need. That's really helpful. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'm gonna forge ahead. I'm going to ask a couple of questions of all four of you, and I'll be interested in your reflections. And then we're going to wrap up. But my first question are, what kind of mistakes have you seen others in your profession, like mistakes you've seen made? Not necessarily, you don't have to, out yourself if you don't want to. But, I did hear Amy say when she was early in her career, which I appreciate because they call it practicing law for a reason. Don't they, Amy? We're still working on it. So what kind of mistakes have you seen people in your profession make? And what kind of mistakes have you seen others potentially in profession on the panel make? And how can we reflect on doing better, both your own profession and those of your partners? So I'm gonna let Amy go first, and then I'm gonna go Kim and Jennifer, and I'm gonna let Angie back clean up.
Okay, I guess mentioned quite a few of them throughout my random tangents here. I think making decisions based on emotion, you get wrapped up in it. These are awful, heinous crimes that you observe and you want to hold people accountable. And so when you see something horrible that has happened and you have some evidence, you try to do what you can to make it fit. And then it isn't until you end up having things suppressed, or you end up putting a victim through 3 depositions and testimony and an appeal, that then you realize I really should have done more work on the front end of this and could have avoided all of it by setting realistic expectations and not making decisions based upon emotions. So those are 2 things that I have seen. I mentioned being all about business. I mean, I will come back to the law and come back to the law and come back to the law, but I think you have to be human in your interactions with everyone, and and specifically survivors of sexual assault and human trafficking. These are the hardest cases to prove. I've tried just about every single kind of case there is, except for maybe treason, which is no longer a state crime anymore. I've done hundreds of jury trials, and give me a murder any day over a sexual assault or a human trafficking case. They are the most difficult cases to prove. They're the most difficult cases to investigate. They're the most difficult cases to carry the weight of those specific cases with you. And the things that I think, the ones I carry still to this day more than others, are the ones that I knew I could not prove and could not file, because you know something happened and you think you owe it to the survivor to try to hold somebody accountable, but when you actually make that decision based upon ethics and facts and the law, you cannot proceed. And so those are the tough ones. The ones that you go forward on and you lose really takes it out of you as well, and you take them personally. I think when you see people who don't take those personally, I think it's time for those people to get out of it. It's not their passion. I think if you can try these cases and do it well, you can try anything, you can investigate anything, you can take these skills that you can learn from this and apply it to anything. I think the us versus them mentality of this is my case or this isn't my case, or it's still in the investigative phase, so it's not my problem, or, you know, the advocate can deal with that, and so I don't need to worry about it. These are all our cases. These are all our survivors. This is a collaborative, multidisciplinary approach in order for us to be successful. So while we need to understand our roles, in order to do your role well, you need to do it with the cooperation of other people. That whole setting realistic expectations. You don't want to be a barrier to prosecution by setting up obstacles in the way. And frankly, just that transparency. It's okay to tell somebody either I can't tell you that answer, or I don't know that answer, and let me find somebody who does and I'll get back to you. But never tell somebody something you know is patently false just because you think it will make them feel better. That's horrible. You're setting up somebody else later on when they have to confront that, whether it's me or whether it's law enforcement or whether it's an advocate down the line that has to say, I'm not sure where you got that information, but that's not quite how things go. We've got to work together to make it work. I think those are kind of my takeaways from things I've done, things I've seen, things I can still improve on as I continue to grow.
Thank you, Amy. Very helpful. Kim, you're next.
I think some of the biggest mistakes I see other advocates make is primarily what we're talking about today, really trying to understand others' roles. For example, I know our local law enforcement is down about 50% of their staff, and they may not be able to respond when they receive calls. And they've asked the state police for assistance in covering our service area. That's huge. So, any way that we can assist, so they're not running over here unnecessarily to serve a protective order. If it's something I can take the client to go pick up, for example, any way that we can help, because we need to understand just our collaborative partners and what their roles are. I think just with other individuals that we work with, I think one of the biggest struggles is they struggle to understand our confidentiality restrictions. I'll get a lot of calls here. I know this person's staying there. I have to speak with them, and it's someone I've never heard of before that's never called here and is not staying here. And they're very, very adamant and persistent. And either way, I probably couldn't tell them anything anyway. So I think it's really difficult for individuals to understand our confidentiality restrictions. And along with that, part of why some of those confidentiality restrictions are there is that I think other partners sometimes struggle with, they have this case, they have decisions they have to make in that moment. We work along that survivor possibly for the next 10 years. So that survivor may not just be thinking about the next conviction or how long that person may be away. They're thinking about when they get out and what does life look like for them after they're released. And that's where we come in. So I think it's hard for others to understand sometimes that the decisions they're making on whether or not they leave a certain situation or whether or not they pursue filing a police report and prosecution, it's often based on long-term safety, not short-term, not in the moment, but what they see as their long-term safety. And I think that can be hard sometimes for some of our collaborative partners to understand.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Let's see, we're coming to Jen next, and then Angie, you're gonna back clean up. Go ahead, Jen.
Okay, so I think, and this is just law enforcement, but also just even prosecution. One of the biggest things, and you've heard me say it before, is it's very difficult to break that pattern of human bias that we all bring. And it's extremely difficult when you're the uniformed officer who's having to take that statement and trying to keep yourself in check where you're not taking those biases, A, being aware of them, and B, not somehow getting them into that document, right? And it's the same for the detective, and it's the same for the prosecution, right? So we're all shaped, or we all have biases, they're shaped from family, culture, religion, education, experiences, professional and personal. And we don't mean to do this, but we very innocently and unintentionally apply these sort of biases to our everyday interactions. And part of that becomes an issue, such as it's very hard for me to explain to officers and detectives that I know that you've just, what this victim has said, I know that you've just rolled it through your head as to what you would consider normal. Maybe it's not normal for you to take 3 Xanax and then go down to, have a drink with a friend and then find yourself passed out later. That might not be your norm, but it very well may be the norm of that person. So that's just a good example of, it's very tough to not only be aware of my own, but have to try to get others to be aware of theirs, and how it truly affects the work if you're not careful. As far as others, this is the biggest thing. So most of us in the criminal justice system, law enforcement, but also advocacy, most of us, in medical, we all, had a calling to do this job. Now, I would almost say that probably most of us have experienced our own traumas, if not all of us. And that is something, and it's kind of what Amy mentioned, but I'm going to take it a little further, emotions, right? So what I find is that if we have had traumas, right, and we are that person that's working, let's say you're the advocate, whatnot, it's very, very easy to all of a sudden put the you in this case and forget that is not about you. It is absolutely about the survivor and whatever you've experienced, right, personally. You've got to make sure that you're not projecting that on to your survivor. I get that. I experienced that from different disciplines quite a bit. And before you know it, it ruins that trust between law enforcement and advocates. Because if I realize that somehow we, or this case, has triggered your trauma, and now it's making, the survivor have to really be confused as to who to trust, the sane, the law enforcement, the prosecutor. And I'm just using advocates as an example, by the way. Everybody does this. So that is the biggest mistake I think we all collaboratively can make if we're not doing a self-assessment. It's very easy to project your experiences onto that survivor, and before you know it, they feel very confused and they don't know who to trust. They feel misguided. And we can all have the best of intentions, but if we're not truly always doing a little internal check and making sure that we're not throwing that out there into the universe and onto others, we're going to fail. So that's the biggest thing for me.
That's really insightful. Thank you, Jennifer. Angie, the 2 questions, just to remind us, what are mistakes that you see in your own profession, and what are some mistakes that you see in your partners, and what would you like people to know about them?
Okay, so mistakes in our own profession, I think we tend to see a lot of nurses who screen out patients who should be seen for examination, even if there's not the potential for evidence collection. There's still that the medical forensic examination is not just about collecting swabs. We do so much more than collecting swabs, and sexual assault nurses know this, but yet they want to follow that time frame, and they forget the value of seeing people outside of time frames. We do it all the time. Like, I don't care if the assault was 2 weeks ago, if there's still some sort of sign or symptom or issue that they're having, or they're there seeking care, they need your assistance. It's not like they just decided to wake up that day and, oh, well, I didn't address this for the last 2 weeks, but I'm going to go and just inconvenience someone today. That was not their goal. So, not to screen patients out, especially when you think of that, getting that medical forensic history is evidence. it can be useful to our prosecutors in moving these cases forward. So, you know, just failing to completely document that altogether is just in many ways, I am almost to the point that I'm going to say it's negligent. Because that's just where we are. We cannot have nurses screening patients out. So if you are aware of that happening, please reach out to me and let me know, or reach out to Ashley Smiley, our statewide health, statewide SANE coordinator. We just want to make sure that we get these nurses back on the same page, because if someone is seeking care, especially, we shouldn't be sending them out the door because there is a certain time on the clock and that doesn't align with what they're seeing. As far as mistakes I see others making, it's not a mistake, but I just kind of wish that our prosecutors' offices would utilize our sexual assault nurses more for not even that medical hearsay, but just as experts. I believe sometimes, even in the smaller communities, they just haven't worked with us a lot. So they don't recognize the value that we can bring to their cases, especially as it relates to child sexual abuse, and relying again on that history and talking about make diagnosis of medical of child sexual abuse based upon that child's disclosure. I think it's important for juries to hear that, and not just from a prosecutor perspective, but from a medical perspective. But it's not a mistake. It's just, you know, they've got to align their witnesses, and they have to be the ones to make sure that they can be cross-examined appropriately. And I understand, but it is something that I think our smaller communities could really benefit from. But yeah, those are the main ones I see.
That's really helpful. All right, I'm going to reflect a little bit on a few things, and then I'm going to give each of you the last word. That's not really true. I didn't mean that. I'm going to get the last word because that's always true. But I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to let you think about this for a minute. What is the single most important thing for an effective SART to be effective? You're all on this panel because you are participants in effective multidisciplinary collaborative work. I just want the single most important thing that people can do to create an effective SART. So I'm going to reflect on a few things that I have just heard because I think they're really important. And I've written a lot of it down because as you've been talking, that there have been a lot of themes, and some of those themes really are about a relationship is what the theme I would bring to the fore. It's, you know, the mistake of the us versus them, the mistake of, you know, of distrust and not feeling like there's value in the other person's work or perspective. And it is really hard. And Kim, I'm gonna highlight you because you're really, I mean, Angie has a statewide reach in her work she does, but you have a multi-county area, right? And so building relationships in one community, in one county takes a long time. Building relationships in 6 or 7 or even 9 or 10 counties feels like it can be taking forever. And when there's turnover, this is really hard too. And we know in law enforcement that we've mentioned before, or some of you have mentioned that we've got police departments that are down many officers. It's a systemic problem. We have places in the state where we don't have SANEs. And I've been around the state and heard people say that I'm driving a survivor 2 hours to a hospital across the state because there isn't a SANE any closer. And we know the duty schedule so that we try not to go when they're not on duty, right? And so this is real, and it isn't anything that, you know, tomorrow any of us are going to fix. But understanding and appreciating that people, I think it was Kim who said people really are doing the best they can with what they have to work with in the places where they are. And having some grace for delay or lack of what you feel like might be optimal response or optimal interaction, I think is important. And when you have relationships with people, that grace is a whole lot easier to give and to get than for somebody that you don't know at all. And so I think everybody benefits from establishing those relationships and understanding that what might look like a conflict really isn't a conflict. It's just a different approach. So the last word's going to be what's the single most important thing for building a strong SART. And I'm going to let Kim start, and then I'm going to go up the chain to Amy, Jen, and then Angie.
I would say just being willing to listen and to learn, and then stay true to your role and your mission. I think if each individual does that, you know, I'm reminded of a trial we had recently where each person stayed true to kind of their lane and their role, and we all worked together and we had an amazing outcome. And it's just an amazing experience. And to watch that survivor heal during that process is just, you know, it's why you come to work every day. So I think when you can have that strong collaboration with individuals, it's just better for the survivor, and that's what it's all about. But I just think being able to listen and learn from each member of your SART would be the best advice I could give.
Excellent. Amy, you're next.
I would say for just starting out, I think the most important part is to get buy-in from the key players in your community and then just let your passion lead the way. You need to have the support from law enforcement, from your community activists, from your mental health professionals, from your advocates, from your prosecutor's office. And whatever you have to do to get their buy-in might be something different for each of those particular audiences. For us, it was, I wouldn't say it was easy because there was still hesitance and resistance and reluctance of, we've always done it this way and things have been working. But when you have the statistics that we did, there was no argument that what we had been doing was not in fact working. And so even the people who had been there for 20 years could not look me in the face and tell me that what we've always been doing is working for the community and working for our survivors and working for them. And if there's a way to improve the way that they had been doing things, you know, why not just give it a try? And if it doesn't work, we can tweak it and figure out what it is that our community needs to do to make this more effective for everyone. And so whatever it is that you have to do to get that buy-in from the right people, to get the right players at the table, figure out what that is, because it's going to look a little bit different for each particular community, and it's going to look a little bit different for each particular partner that you need to get at that table. But you're going to have some passionate people in your community, whether that's you or somebody else. You need to find them and let them kind of lead the way on that to get the buy-in and get yourselves moving. And then once you've got that behind you, you can really make some progress pretty quickly.
Great. Thank you for that reflection. Jennifer, you're next. And then Angie, you're last.
Yeah, so obviously buy-in, because we can't even do anything until we have that buy-in, right? But once that's there, I think one of the biggest, and it's really twofold, but the biggest component that has helped us is we have a well-established common goal. It's common. It's a common goal. We share it. We do not all go about it in the same way. And understanding that at the end of the day, it's not about you, it's about the goal. We can work around anything as long as everybody's ready to communicate, but that goal has to always be the primary focus, because the goal should always be the common goal, which is to end sexual assault, right? So I think for us, we always strive to remember that, and it's easier when you're sitting there and having to have a discussion with someone that's either your counterpart or someone from another discipline. And we both have our own ways of standard procedures or whatnot that we are going to have to follow. But if we know what the end goal is, we can work through that. And we've all committed to that. So commit to the goal and remain steadfast to it. And then it's pretty easy to put your ego aside once you do that.
Excellent. All right, Angie.
So I think everything that you guys have already said, I just want to echo all of it. I mean, I wrote down immediately, stay in your lane, relationships matter, and you stole my word, grace. But we have to give each other grace because we're human and these are sticky situations. You know, this is not like, you know, we don't work in a plant where we're putting together parts and pieces. And at the end of the day, we have this beautiful thing that we created on an assembly line. It's so much bigger than that. And so we are going to make mistakes along the way. And it's just about owning that and giving grace when it's due, which I think we all deserve. And this is not an easy job. And when we are working against each other or when we are working in silos, no one benefits from that. So that's kind of what I think.
That's excellent. And that's a great final word. You will see on the screen, and you've seen on the screen for a while now, the email addresses for everyone on the panel. Ashley Smiley is not on the panel, but she is the State Department of Health SANE coordinator. So she and Angie work really closely together as part of the mission to build capacity. We know we need more nurses in doing this work. We know that's not an easy thing to accomplish, but Ashley is a partner in that. And I will say what I think is true, and I hope it is true, that anybody on this panel, and certainly anyone who works at ICESA HT, wants to be a resource, wants to be helpful, wants to answer your questions and to advise as you go along about this multidisciplinary work. It can be very hard, but to the point that somebody made a minute ago, it's hard, but it's a whole lot harder if we're working against each other. So let's stop doing that, and let's start listening and learning and being collaborative and providing grace and acceptance for each of our roles that we play. And with that, I'm going to conclude. It's been a real privilege to be on this panel with all four of you. I want to thank you for not only being on the panel today, but for all the work that you do. Really important work. I'm going to give back to the participants about 20 minutes for you to take a break. It's really cold in Lafayette, which is where I am right now. I don't know what it's like where you are, but going out and seeing the sunshine might be a nice thing to do for a couple of minutes before we reconvene. And I'm going to ask Kelly, are you still with us? And when does the session restart for today?
I am still with you.
Wonderful.
And first of all, thank you. I could have listened to you five all day. Thank you. That was unbelievably valuable. So I cannot thank you enough for your time. We are rejoining at 2:30. So
Okay.
everyone has some time for a little break.
Wonderful. That is going to be, I think, welcome. So thank you all so very much. And to those who are participating in Core 40 and who are new, good luck. And we are here to help, and we are behind you 100%. So I am going to log off for now.